Thank you, Karan, and hello, everyone. I'm Richa Kumar, Senior Director for Software Engineering here at GitHub, and I have an amazing panel of speakers with me who I'll introduce in just a minute. So platforms like GitHub provide tools and capabilities for developers anywhere in the world to solve problems, learn from each other, share their work, and collaborate towards common goals. Today, technology is at the heart of everything, and access to technology is critical in helping us solve problems and to innovate in any area. That said, if we think about it, the primary language in which developers are able to work today is English. And access to majority of the technical content and programming frameworks assumes that one is well versed with the English language. So are we leaving out a vast majority of people who do not fit this mold? If we really want to be able to reach every aspiring developer and idea generator in India or other parts of the world, which have so many different languages, it's important for us that we transcend the language boundary. Luckily, we have with us today two very accomplished people who have been thinking about this problem and are leading innovation in this space. So join me in welcoming Nikhil Malhotra, Head of Innovation at Tech Mahindra and creator of the Bharat markup language, which is an open source markup language for India, and Kailash Nadh, a CTO of Zerodha, hi Kailash, and creator of Olam and LR, which are open source regional language dictionaries. Nikhil and Kailash, we are eager to hear about, what have been some of the motivating factors for you? How do you see this problem space, and some of the ways that you have started tackling this? So, Nikhil, let's start with you. Tell us more about how you would frame the problem that you're trying to address, and also tell us a bit more about Bharat markup language.
Sure, Richa. First of all, thank you so much to GitHub. I know this is an open forum and an open community, and taking it forward to this community is a great privilege as well. I think the problem's always been there, Richa. If you notice, right, the 90% of us in India speak vernacular, and we are, about 10% of us are only well versed in English language. My inspiration comes from, one of the mentorship that I was doing with Atal Incubation Centers with, few of the kids. And this was a program called Student Innovator Program or Student to Society. And we had students from both urban and rural sectors. And one of the, the teams that won was a rural sector team from Chhattisgarh. These 4 students used to walk about 45 kilometers every day to go to school. And, you call it scientific serendipity, you call it thought. They dropped in red amaranthus, green amaranthus, and some kind of bajra on a piece of land. The weed that grew out, they actually took juice out of it. And that particular juice started solving a problem of malnutrition in that area. This project has been now under the eyes of UNICEF, and people are looking at it. So I was amazed by the ingenuity. And of course, there was a challenge to solve, and these guys were solving it. But then they came to us for mentorship, and we gave them mentorship regarding how can you put it into a packaged product, how can you put it into seeds format, etc. But one of the students asked me, sir, I want to learn technology, but I don't know English. So that was possibly the starting point that got me thinking about a year back, saying, should India not have the ability, or should Indian kids not have the ability to code something in their own language? And that was the origination point of BHAML, or Bharat markup language. Now, what does BHAML do? It's actually open source. It's available on bhaml.org. People can go and have a look at it. But for the moment that we started off, we said that let kids at least code HTML by simple parsing and transliteration in their own language. So we've given 12 languages for kids to code on. It's Hindi, Marathi, Punjabi, Gujarati. And then we said that, once we go through this phase, let kids try it out. We will even go towards some more known languages like JavaScript, like, even scripting languages that we could do, so that we could give that kind of a layer of abstraction to kids, saying that now you should be able to code in your own language. So that's basically our attempt.
That's awesome, Nikhil. It's great to see the from where that motivation started and where you've been able to take it. Wonderful to hear about that. Kailash, what were the motivating factors behind the regional language dictionaries that you have started? I know this has been an effort that's been going on for some time, but would love to hear what kind of prompted you to do that, and what you feel has been the impact or can continue to be the impact of some of this work.
So Olam, the first dictionary that came out 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago, 2010. And it was born out of my personal frustrations of not being able to find a decent digital Malayalam dictionary. Malayalam is my mother tongue, that's what I speak. And that pushed me down the rabbit hole of figuring out how the landscape of Indian online dictionaries, and I realized it was an abysmal landscape. There wasn't anything, and the few online dictionaries that were available, they were riddled with ads, the quality wasn't great. The agenda was not really to run good dictionaries for the public. It was, I think, commerce. So I figured that there should be an open data, high quality dictionary that is freely accessible to everyone, not just people looking up definitions in a dictionary, but researchers, students, anyone. It should be open data. And I put together a dictionary with a few thousand words that I entered myself, and I found a few data sets, small little data sets floating around on the internet, unfortunately unattributed. I put everything, scraped everything together and built Olam. It was an English Malayalam dictionary, and it went live in 2010. And today, it's still available on Olam.in. There's a mobile app. I think 2 to 3 million Malayalam speakers use it every day. So that does prove that there is a great need for open access, open data language dictionaries in all languages. So that's the story of Olam. Alar is a recent addition when I completely randomly, by happenstance, came across V. Krishna, who'd spent 40 years building a dictionary, which nobody really knew about. And he was gracious enough to open source it. So we took it, the biggest authoritative Kannada English dictionary, and it's called Alar now. It's available again, open data dictionary. So that's 2 big open data regional dictionaries.
Nice. Great to hear about that, Kailash. And just kind of opening this up to both of you, what have been some of the challenges that you all have faced as you've sort of embarked on these journeys, and how have you what tools or approaches have you used to help you make progress?
Yeah, so I'll take that question, Richa. I think one of the biggest challenges is, of course, lack of awareness. And I think I would be very, very open saying that the moment you get into a coding world, there is a kind of a predestined or a kind of a predisposed notion that these are the languages and this is something that we've got to do. That is something that I think programs like GitHub, we going on the open source channel would really help us take it forward, number one. Number two, a lot of people are not aware about the strengths of what local regional languages have, and have been produced as well. Like Kailash really mentioned, that Malayalam, there's a very, very valid dictionary that is now made. My research started about 3 years back on Sanskrit as well. And I found out that there's so much to talk about natural language processing right over there in that language, even though it may not be spoken very, very openly. It's only spoken in small parts and small sectors. But Sanskrit can give us that ability to understand the root of language as well as how the natural language processing systems could take place. So, if there is awareness, then there is a sort of, the people do understand what's the strength. What are we doing for it? I think number one, I continue to talk about it in all forms I go to, just letting people know. I continue to talk about what's going on with the language, how is Sanskrit basically going on, what should be the next step. Number two is I've got a very, very good team that is also now taking this language out to young kids and even rural sectors. Very interestingly, in my lab, in Maker's lab, there is a gentleman who was earlier an Uber driver who actually learned over by the dint of his hard work or whatever, Python, C, C++, etc. And he joined the lab. Now, COVID pushed him to the villages. He's now in one of the villages in Maharashtra. So he's taken upon himself, his name is Satish, he's taken upon himself. He brings in students from about 30, 40 odd schools in the rural sector, and he starts teaching them BHAML. He starts teaching them, the coding language itself. So that has been more of a generic effort that we've been doing to raise that awareness. There are, of course, other channels that we are utilizing as marketing, etc. But awareness is one of the biggest things that we feel is the challenge at this point in time.
Got it. How about you, Kailash?
I completely agree. And that awareness also translates to a significant lack of academic and computing language resources. And I've cited this example before. Building, if you want to do, nobody thinks twice about English string search. You do Control F, you put your string in, and search happens. There are many different algorithms to do English string search, and that's the case for Latin languages. But search for Indic languages is an understudied research area, and without academic research, you can't really build tools that people can use. So even to get like simple phonetic search working for the dictionaries, I'd figured there was nothing available. So there was a lot of trial and error in a very non-academic sense to get that fundamental string search to work. Things have improved quite a bit over the last 10 years. There are large companies who offer free computing tools, but it's definitely awareness. And I think one of the side effects of language input becoming prevalent across mobile devices everywhere is, I think people assume that the Indic language problem is solved because you can read your language on the phone, you can write your language on the keyboard. But in fact, the fact that language keyboards are now standard on all Indian operating systems was in fact a community push that happened 5-6 years ago. If it wasn't for that, like a open source group pushing for that to be a standard, if it wasn't for that, I don't think we'd have standard input tools. So there's an acute lack of awareness, especially amongst engineering folks also. People assume the language problem is solved, but when it comes to Indic languages, we haven't even scratched the surface.
Makes sense. I think what I'm hearing from you is that, there have been some recent pushes which have helped the end consumers to be able to, see a lot of content or apps in their language of choice. But when it comes to really enabling the creators, right, we still have a long way to go because of the lack of the content, the lack of the tools, frameworks, which primarily work with English today. And so I think the work that both of you are doing is really going to help and take us a little bit forward on that path. And you talked about technical challenges around string search and things like that. And both of you will probably have insights into this. So how does that, is that, especially as you worked on 2 different languages, dictionaries, are there patterns that can scale out to other languages? Is it every time you're adding support for a new language, are we starting from scratch? How maybe you can give us a little insight into, how much effort is involved and what are some of the ways that people could contribute, along this effort?
No, absolutely, Richa. I think digital content and content remains a challenge, as Kailash rightly mentioned. And I think my area has been to find a middle layer for Sanskrit as well. And I'm finding some patterns, wherever we of languages across the subcontinent. There are different patterns, but then again, these patterns need to be adjusted to that specific language. Now, just to give you an example, a lot of people, and that's where, if I may talk to the community in terms of what has been the genius that Panini was. And I think Panini's genius was to understand where exactly is information encoded in a language. So how much of that information is encoded and what is there exactly which needs to be grabbed up if you want to talk about that language. Now, considering simple words like the man's going to the village, I think all of us, or all of you, our viewers, would know that in Sanskrit it translates to Purusha Gramam Gachati. The problem is that if I replace the order of the words in English, for example, village go man, the meaning completely changes. In Sanskrit, because of inflection, the meaning remains the same. So and Panini's genius was to actually say where exactly is this information included. It's not in the Purusha, it's not in the Gramam. It's actually in the Ti of Gachati, where exactly it makes that verb available. This specific construct and this specific rule applies to almost all sectors of Indic languages. They may be different here and there, but if you look at the pattern in which we speak and the way the languages have been handed over, this particular pattern applies to all. There are certain other patterns which don't, but the research has been on in different sectors. I've seen colleges, we've seen academia work on it, we've seen researchers work on it, but there are some very, very good patterns to help us in natural language processing, which we are finding within Indic languages. And that's been a revelation. So I think if more and more people join this community of open source, they would find that these patterns would also help them solve some of the challenges for natural language processing in English as well. So that's what we're finding out.
Very interesting. Got it.
Yep, I agree. Indic languages share, Indic languages share quite a bit in common, and research developed for one language. I think there's a significant overlap with what you could use for other languages. To cite a concrete example, for the Malayalam dictionary to work, I ended up porting Metaphone, which is an English phonetic hashing algorithm. Really simple. You take a word elephant, apple, it'll encode it to 2 or 3 letters like A, P, L, or E, P, N, T. So the idea is that similar sounding words will all hash to the same set of strings. It's called Metaphone. It's available in the public domain. So that was ported for Malayalam, and that's how phonetic search on that Malayalam dictionary works. But because the phonetic nature of Kannada is extremely similar, and for that matter, Hindi, Gujarati, etc., this was easily ported overnight to Kannada, and we suddenly have Kannada phonetic search on Alar. So a lot of things that we develop for one Indic language can be outright applied with very minor tweaks and exceptions for many other languages. And like you said, I wanted to add one thing to what you said earlier. There is widespread availability of tools. For example, there is Google Translate for almost all major Indic languages today. And there's Google Input tools. But these are all, unfortunately, proprietary. How these tools work, we don't know. What are the algorithms that power these tools? We don't know. What are the data sets that go into it? We don't know. So if that tool disappears one day, millions of users will be handicapped. That's why it's important for language-related research and data to all come out in the public domain and be open source.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And so how would you, if I ask both of you that, if our open source community would want to contribute on this front, both specifically on your projects, as well as, how should they be keeping all of this in mind in their own efforts? Any advice for the folks listening in?
I think I'll go first.
Yeah.
So all the components that have gone into building these dictionaries, English, Malayalam, English, Kannada, the data sets themselves, part of speech tagged, and the software that runs the website, the phonetic algorithms that power search, these are all open source and they're all available on GitHub. So for someone wanting to start to do simple things, especially surrounding open data and dictionaries, they could tinker with, the data, they could tinker with the code, they could even use some of these tools to build their own little local dictionaries. For example, you could very easily, with minimal effort, build a Hindi technical word dictionary. It could be 5,000 or 10,000 words. So, or even a couple thousand words, but, technical, scientific, mathematical words. So even small efforts like that, building niche open data dictionaries for different languages would be a great start. So there are many things one could do without actually getting into proper linguistic research.
Got it. Got it.
No, I agree
And,
with Kailash. I think, sorry, just to add to one point over here, I think one of the things is for people to actually go and use these projects. I think download them, fork them, find out what are some of the things that is going on, and maybe add on top of it, and figure out what's the base value at what that is being created. And I think the moment you add more, the moment you learn more as well, understanding what's going on, and you would go into your own research, small little research on the side as well. Yeah.
Makes sense. And Nikhil, one thing I wanted to touch upon was that as we think about making programming or technology more accessible to non-English speakers, do we see it as like what you're trying to do with BHAML, where you're enabling them to use the language that they're familiar with, and then I guess translating so that the current tools that work with English can continue to work? Do you see it continuing in that form? Do you see other strategies where we use no code and low code kind of things and more natural language processing, which does code generation? Or are there even other strategies to make this more accessible?
No, you're absolutely right, Richa. I think it's a mixture of both. It's both translation, it's both transliteration, but it's also about looking at natural language processing. But I think the vision that I carry within India is that at the end of the day, on silicon, it's just zero. So what we've got to do is basically do the layer on top and change that entire layer. So whether it's the layer of compilers, it's the layer of assembler, it's even the layer of the OS, that should essentially be changed to understand the language in its most prime form. If that happens, you can put that as an OS addendum on anything. It could be a version of Linux, it could be FreeBSD or whatever, but that will really change the impact of a language and the usage of that language as well. So while we all say that C is the mother or the foundation of all all programming languages, could we develop another language which is like C, but it's basically based out of all of these regional language structures as well? Could it have a completely different structure? Could it have a completely different database structure as well? So I think those components is something which is basically driving this vision. This work is very, very primitive. And I would like to call my work, I'm not privy to actually say what Kailash is doing, but it's very, very primitive. It's actually scratching the surface. But the open source community now has the ability to actually take this forward and bring it out in a much more bigger and brighter way. Change the layers, the OSI layers, as you call it, and that will really produce the change for the index sector as well.
Makes sense. And what do both of you think in terms of the overall role that open source plays in regards to computer literacy in India?
I think, as I said earlier, there have been considerable interventions and activism and pushes from the open source language computing community, all volunteer based in India, which we don't really see on the surface, and thanks to which why most Indic languages today are properly standardized Unicode. There are BIS standards mandating that all rules should have Indic languages. So the open source communities are what really gave us the Indic digital, computing language revolution. We don't see it because we only interface with the consumer devices and consumer software. So I would say that the question, how can open source help, is moot in the face of open source is what really gave us, this Indic languages in the digital form to begin with. And going forward, also, as I said, could be simple algorithms, could be open data sets. All these building blocks, they have to be in the public domain for true innovation and accessibility to happen. You can't really build, if you end up building a great language translation model and you keep it proprietary, you're holding language hostage from a large part of the population. And and everything is going online, especially critical government public services. So it's important that all these critical public services that are going online are accessible in local languages too. For that, you need great, publicly accessible open building blocks. So FOSS is highly intertwined and ingrained in this whole, moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nikhil, anything you'd like to add there?
No, I think Kailash has pretty much covered everything. I think and I think the reason is for everyone to see. I think the reason we are having and discussing this today on a GitHub Satellite is the reason enough for us to say that this is the power of open source community, and that power of open source community can actually be fettered in. Yeah, so
makes sense. And I think just touching back on the example that you started with, Nikhil, at the beginning of our discussion, where you talked about these kids who had really come upon this great idea and that had helped solve malnutrition, and really for them to take that idea and reach a lot more people and make a bigger impact. Really, it's technology that's going to hold them back if they don't get access to it. And so that was a great way to see that if we really want to reach out to all those folks that are coming up with these innovative ideas and really empower them, raising that awareness amongst, both open source community, corporations, everyone has to come together and see what we all can do in this area to really, truly make this technology accessible to everyone. So it's been wonderful talking to both of you. It's really fascinating to hear about the work that you all have been doing. I'm very, very excited about the possibilities that are ahead of us. And I hope that both at GitHub and all, our amazing open source community, that we're going to take away some important, thoughts back from this. And, as we do our own work, we'll be looking at how we can make everything that we do more accessible and empower more people across the world. Thank you both. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, Richa. Thank you. Thank you.